There are many indications of fraud with this system, and that should be eliminated.
Explain a bit more about the fraud. From the legal and the tax point, have these clients ever, once they have gotten the advice that they need from the visa perspective, went a little further from, I have the visa, tell me how can I incorporate a firm for myself?
Yeah, we send them to people like you guys. The key word in immigration is optionality. I think that's what you always want to have. You don't want to marry yourself to any particular path.
Hot talk of the town right now, H1B. It's like nobody has clarity, and yet somehow everyone has an opinion about it. Sometimes I feel that they make rules so that people can't break rules, but then it's like a vicious cycle.
With EB1A, there has been people that hire consultants to write papers for them. They get citations from other people that are also going through the fraud.
I'm on F and I'm on OPT and I want to own STEM OPT. Can I own a company? Can I own 100% shares of the company? Can I be the sole owner?
Yesterday, we were just sending one petition to the government. It was 1,200 pages.
Every startup founder, every professional, every student at some point faces a challenge that crosses borders. It could be setting up a business, it could be raising capital, it could be moving to another country. And that's what this podcast is about. Real conversations on building, scaling, and living across borders. And I couldn't think of a better way to kick off our very first episode than with immigration. So, hi, I am Jasmeet Kaur and I head the legal vertical at Antique Partners. At Antique Partners, we work with startups and professionals through their entire journey from incorporation to growth to legal and tax challenges, and yes, immigration too. So, in each episode, we will bring in voices who can share insights from the front lines, whether it's law, business, tax, immigration, or the future of work. And today, we are starting with immigration because it's one of the hottest and fastest changing topics right now. With me today, I have an amazing guest, Ramiro Robelos from the US, who is building Tukki, a startup that's reshaping the way people access immigration support. So, without much of the delay, let's begin. Ramiro, tell us a bit about yourself and Tukki.
I just mean thanks for inviting me. Honored to be here and excited for our conversation. So yeah, as you were saying, immigration is a very hot topic lately, and really important generally for for businesses, for people, for immigrants, for the country. So I immigrated from Argentina almost 6 years ago now. Came to the US. I was working for McKinsey back then. I came with McKinsey, then eventually got my green card. But then seeing how complicated the process was and how stressful, and after talking with many immigrants and many companies and understanding this was not just like my case that was unlucky somewhat, but it was kind of the norm. We decided to build Tukki just to change how immigration works in the US. And that means combining great attorneys with great technology just to provide that superior service and improve lives of people, right, that want to come here.
I really loved how you framed that. I mean, you're not just building in the space, you are living it and are solving such a big problem. That's why I was so excited to have this conversation with you. And I would love to start with the personal journeys because you have already mentioned that you migrated from Argentina. So, do you feel like you're both a founder and a case study at the same time?
Yeah, I do. I mean, and that has actually been extremely helpful, like building something that I would like to have had before, and being in the shoes of all my clients, right? I have been there myself, my family, my friends, right? So I think, look, I know that there's many ways of building companies, and you don't necessarily need to have lived through the pain to build a successful company, but it does really help, like just understanding when we get some feedback from a client or anything, like you understand what they mean, right? Because you have been part of that journey. And that for us at least has been extremely helpful to building this in the right way, just understanding our clients and being, I could have been my own client, right? So that's kind of useful.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Was it
because it's
always so difficult, Ramiro? By the way, this is Rajeshwari. I'm the tax consultant at Antique Partners. I'm the research expert at subject matter expertise. My quick question to you would be, when you just said that you have also been a case study while being the founder of your own organization, how many times have you heard the questions which you have rewritten in your own head like a zillion times before having an answer via the application that you are building, which I must say is a wonderful one. I absolutely love the website. I mean, I think if I had the expertise of building something of my own, I would definitely take that as a reference for myself.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think to your first question, I think that this has always been this difficult. It's a complex process, right? Like, yesterday we were just sending one petition to the government. It was 1,200 pages, right? So it's huge documentation loads with forms, with letters, with many document translations. Like, there's so many things that can go wrong, right? And if you're doing this manually, right, even if you're an awesome attorney, right, it doesn't matter. You start putting volume on the law firm and you start building these things, and everything is with Google Drive and emails, and who needs to do what, and did I review this or not, and I need to print. Like, I cannot even imagine how to do this manually, right? It's extremely painful. Like yesterday, right, we were printing this again on 200 pages for this particular case. Like, a typical law firm would probably print one document by one, like one of the 150 different documents, and then put a cover on top of them. And how many mistakes can you make, and how long do you take, right? Like, in our case, it's just like one click and you print the entire thing together. But like, all those things, right, it starts to pile up, right? I don't think there is kind of like a silver bullet or like one particular pain point, right? It's just a combination of many, many details. I think that this applies to the legal profession generally, right? Like it's just like all these little details that you need to consider over and over and over again. So I think, yeah, I think like every time since I got in touch with US immigration, I saw it being complicated. And every time you talk with someone working on this for like 30 years, like, it's not that they say like, oh no, it used to be super easy, right? Like, I think it's always being like this.
yes, certainly. I mean, legal is something it can never be easy. Now we are trying to digitalize it. Even in our form, we do not print the documents. We have it in digital format in the cloud. So it's always accessible to all of us because we are working remotely. And if we start printing, we literally have to fax it to each other. And that doesn't really make sense. Plus, when things can be digitalized, why not leverage that? I mean, you are a perfect example of it. I mean, sitting in front of us.
Yeah, but I mean, in our case, right, you run into the government, which they don't allow you to send them digital things, right? So you are forced to print. And anyway, the funny thing about that is that, for example, this example I was telling you, right, like, I printed more than 1,000 pages. I had to put it in a box because there's like no no other way to send it other than a box.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that because we are currently working with a client where Jasmeet has to like write so many letters to the IRS and the New York's Workers' Compensation Board. And she's like, I am just I'm just 1 minute away from becoming a pigeon and sending myself to the IRS.
Yeah, no, but
Because it doesn't accept the emails. It doesn't accept
no,
any
they
any
don't.
sort of a digital form of uh
Yeah,
the
no, but
letters, the whatever.
yeah, and the funny thing is that we send that box that travels halfway the country, and then as soon as it gets there, they scan it, right? So I don't really understand why, but this is still the case, right? And they scan it black and white, so they ask you not to send anything in color because that's going to get lost. So all these inefficiencies, but I mean, that we think that eventually that's going to change, but for now there's that, right? So there's that additional thing, and sometimes FedEx is late. So I mean, that's just one detail, right? But there are so many others, and again, it's so easy to miss one of these small details, right? Right now, like, we need to pay on checks. Now they're going to change it. So you're fighting between innovating in an industry, adding AI and other very cool things, and then you need to print it and FedEx it, right? So it's a funny situation where you are really, um, at the end of innovation, and then the other one you're still printing and sending a FedEx.
Ramiro, it's interesting when you say this that, despite having everything done on AI, despite having the comfort of clicking the right format or the right way of doing things by a click of the mouse, it somehow still becomes a very strenuous process, the minute it goes to the respective board. Like, as I said, that it still has to be physically made, it gets scanned in black and white. So ultimately the delay is still there. So I mean, all I can say is, if the delay is still going to be there, but the AI is going to help us make it a little bit faster and easier, then I think, I mean, you just won the whole thing then.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's like two different places where we've seen people suffer, right? One is in the government adjudications, delays, or wrongful adjudications, but the other one is in the preparation of the full thing, right? I had clients that they took 6, 9, 10 months preparing like a petition, and that's the part where we are impacting the most, right? Instead of taking 6 months, we're taking 6 weeks, and then the quality of the petition is superior, and you're mistakes, right? But yeah, I mean, once it gets to the government, the only thing you could argue is that if you make a better quality petition, you have way less chances of getting a request for evidence or a denial, which in turn will also delay a lot of the process and add a lot of stress. So there's only so much you can do. I think there's a lot of value that you can add by doing this process seamless and better. But there's always going to be a part where it's discretionary and you depend on the officer, right? And the government. And the officer does have discretion, right? So sometimes some clients come to us and say, like, yeah, my attorney told me, like, this is like 95% chances of getting approved. It's like, well, how do you really, like, how do you give a number, right? Like, you don't know who you're going to get in the government. Like, yeah, I understand, like, the spirit behind it, right? Like, yeah, if you have, I can tell you have a solid case. Now, I've seen extremely solid case getting denied, and I've seen weaker cases getting approved directly, right? So there is this part where we are combining, like, great technology, great process, great service with, discretionality, manual processes. So it's just an art kind of combining the full thing to provide the best service you can.
Right, that makes sense. So like you mentioned, I have one question specifically about the applications because we have seen that EB1A and 1 are the extremely difficult applications. So, and we have the criteria that at least 3 to 4 criteria should be usually meet and are considered sufficient. But is there any unsaid criteria that can become the reason for rejection?
Yeah. So look, for EV1A in particular, so in case anyone listening, they don't know what we're talking about. So EV1A, it's a green card, the first priority one. It's one of the few green cards that you can self-petition, meaning you don't need an employer to sponsor you. So that's why it makes it so attractive. And the fact that it's one, so EV1, it means it's one of the fastest possible for employment based, right? So generally for most of the world, that means that you can get a green card almost, immediately. Like that step is the quickest and you don't have any backlog. With India, for example, it's like a backlog of like 2-3 years. But just to compare with India, right? Like for example, the next category is like 12 years, right? So it's the fastest one. So it's really attractive. And it's based out of there's 10 criteria you could aim for. You technically need to get at least 3 to get approved. But a few things here. So there's a second step with EV1. So the first one is checking the 3 boxes, right? Okay, I have 3 of the 10 categories. That's great. Now there's a second one that it's called final merits. And final merits is kind of a more subjective part where the officers take a look at your case and they try to assess whether you are at the top of your field or not. So technically you could comply with 3 criteria, but then you might still be denied, right? So final merit is a combination of the quantity and quality of your criteria. So for example, there's one criteria that is publications about you, right, in press. So yeah, technically, if you have one article from 3 years ago from a medium level, newspaper talking about you and your work, technically you check that box. Now, if you have 30 articles about you and you're on the cover of Forbes, you also check that box, but they are not the same, right? And that's when it starts to play in the final merits to whether like is it really like a great exposure, like a solid criteria or not. So that's why typically a lot of attorneys talk about kind of these central pieces or anchor criteria to tell your story, right? So for example, for scientists, the anchor criteria typically are their own papers and the citations, right? So that's how you frame your case, your EV1 case. You might have other criterias, but the driving story of your case is how many papers you wrote, what was the innovation you made, the original contributions to the field. Whereas with a startup founder, the actual thing is the startup you created, right? So the critical role you had there, the funding you got, the awards, the publications about your startup. So it's not just like a checklist, but telling a story. So what's the story behind your case, and why are we going to argue that you're really at the top of your field? And beyond that, like, we typically recommend clients to have at least 5 criteria to go after AV1. You could do it with 4 that are very solid. I would be a bit nervous to go with 3, like, generally speaking, right? Like, generally speaking, there's one way of, like, if you have like a one major award, you can skip all that. Like, let's say you got a Nobel Prize or a Grammy Award or like this super gigantic, but there's not that many people that comply with that. So generally speaking, you want to have a very solid case.
Yeah, that's correct. The reason why I specifically asked this question is because we had a client and he was so adamant on EB1A and he was not even meeting three criteria. When we specifically said that you will at least have to meet five just to make sure your application won't be rejected. But that was really difficult to convince him.
That's our recommendation. It doesn't mean that it's impossible to get approved with 3. Of course it is, right? Of course there's cases that they were approved with 3. Now, this is a matter of, like, do you want to risk it? Do you want to be solid, right? So it's all a matter of chances. And again, there is discretionality on USCIS, and you will also find of cases where they gave them the same 6 criteria and then they deny them on final merit. So it's not a recipe of, like, okay, you need 2 judging, 3 articles, 1 critical role, 1 higher remuneration, then we're done, right? It's just looking the case end to end. I think that's where the attorney experience come into play, right? When you look it from outside and having done hundreds of these, you can tell, okay, this makes sense, right? Like, this combined kind of like weighted average of quality, quantity, and categories makes sense. And then, of course, is our job to make a great story and to present it in the best light possible, just for the adjudicator to know, right? Like, by the way, I interviewed many former USCIS officers and asked them, like, hey, what do you look for? Like, what is exactly that's important to you or not? And that's when I found out that they, even though these petitions have 700, 800, 1,000 pages, they have 1 to 2 hours to review the entire thing, right? So they don't really go to this into detail and depth. So you need to be able to convey the story as condensed as you can. And a lot of times that means eliminating certain documents, right? Like, that's one thing we see with clients. They want to include everything they did in their lives, and we don't like that approach, right? It's quality over quantity. So if there's something that is not necessarily the best evidence we can have, like, sometimes we will avoid including it just to have a crisper and better story end to end.
Interesting question here is this, that because you're from the same, like, because you're in this industry where you are actually helping all of your clients to get their desired visas, do you ever feel that if there was this one thing that you would want to change about the whole visa thing, this could be that one thing that where you actually get like a, not like a recipe book or a rule book, but something like the reasons why their visas got rejected, or maybe, like, you can make sort of those case studies and come up with not so much of a rule book per se, but then something which comes near to it.
We did that, and we're actually going to include it in the website pretty soon. We did is, so petitions are not public until they go to the appeals office, right, to the AAO. So once you make a petition, it gets denied, and you want to appeal, then that goes into public record, and you can see the actual responses from the AAO. We have analyzed more than 200 of those for AV1s, and we have made the very long work of, like, quantifying and subdividing and subsegmenting every single denial and whatnot. And actually, if you go to our LinkedIn page, there's like a few analyses that we did there, but we're going to have a full data section on the website. So there's clearly certain categories that get denied way more often than others. So, for example, memberships, we saw 50 applications to memberships in the AAO, and all of them were rejected, right? But then judging, there was like a 70% approval of that category. So there are certain categories that seem to be more difficult than others. Again, this is a bit nuanced and a bit tilted, because remember, these are only appeals, right? So you don't really have like the full set. but still directionally, this really matches what we've seen in our own cases. So I would say that, for example, for EB1, scholarly articles or authorship and judging, those two categories are kind of the best in terms of like high chances of getting approved. Because again, if you
Hmm.
wrote paper, it's really hard for a USCIS officers to say you didn't, right? So it's not that subjective. But now with memberships, so memberships is you have been a part, you have been admitted into an association that requires outstanding achievements in the field. So that's way more subjective, right? Like what do that even mean, right? And as judged by experts. So there's so many places that could go wrong. Or original contributions of major significance. Like what do that even mean? Like when do we really say that you made something original that had an impact at large in the field? So the more subjective the category, the easier it is that you might get pushed back. So that's what I would say that, again, judging and authorship are the two that have the highest statistical chances of getting approved. Again, it all depends on the quality and quantity of things you have, right? But those two are things that we encourage people to try and get. And if you don't have it yet, you can organically work towards that, right? And that's okay. Like you can, look for opportunities to become a judge, or you can proactively start writing technical articles to be published in certain newsletter or trade publications, right?
Yeah, correct. Now, I would like to ask a question. I mean, that is the hot talk of the town right now. H1B, of course. I'm sure you must have seen it coming. So, I mean, it's like nobody, literally nobody has clarity, and yet somehow everyone has an opinion about it. Your thoughts on how will this shift the employment patterns for a US employer?
So the reason no one has clarity is because the proclamation itself was not really clear, right? So there's many concepts that I think it's important to understand. So there's one thing that is status in the US, right? So you have an H1B, you come into the US with the visa, so you are in the US with H1B status. There's another concept that is entry into the US, right? The act of coming to the airport with the visa and wanting to enter at that particular time. And there's the visa issuance at the consulate outside, right? The three of those things are different. The proclamation is kind of combining some of those things, because the proclamation is on entry to start. So they first said on entry. So technically, if you change status in the US, so you are on an F1 and you change to H1B, you are technically not impacted. But then they said also for visa issuance on the consulate. So it's not written in a way that is consistent and that is clear, right? And then after the
Yeah.
proclamation, different secretaries of the government said contradictory things. And then, in terms of like paying every year or every 3 years for new ones, for existing ones. And then CBP and USCIS, two government agencies working for, directly with immigration, they issued also some clarifications with they were not exactly the same, right? So after all that, the best guess the community has is this is not impacting any existing H1Bs. And most people tend to agree that if you transfer to another employer, you would not be impacted. Like let's say you have a previous H1B, you're technically getting a new one, but you're transferring, but it's supposedly not impacted so far. And Secretary Levitt said that this would only impact like next year's lottery. However, there are certain H1Bs that don't go to the lottery, the cap exempt. So those are technically also impacted, even though they didn't talk about that. So it's a bit confusing. However, there's going to be litigation on this because there's a rule in the INA, in the Immigration Nationality Act, that says that USCIS can only charge fees that are reasonable to cover the costs. And of course, 100K are not reasonable to cover the costs. There were two intents to raise fees in similar fashion in 2020. Both were slammed by the court. So we expect that there is like at least significant chance that this is not going to fly. We need to see, right? But I personally would be surprised if 1 year from now people are really paying 100K to get a visa. Like I would be a bit surprised. I don't think, again, it's just speculation, right? Who knows? But I don't think that's going to stand. And I don't think that's a good thing for the country because, again, right, there's like second and third order implications. So, for example, there's like whatever 1.7 million people, trying to get student visas and coming. That was the number I saw today. Hopefully that's the right one, but if not, like there's many people coming to the US on student visas, right? Many of them are relying on the fact that they will get OPT, STEM OPT, if
H1B.
they're doing STEM, and then they will get an H1B. If they don't see a pathway to doing that, then you might decide US is not a great chance, right? Because education here is expensive. And if you cannot pay it afterwards, then you might not even come. And if we stop receiving students, then you stop receiving, again, first, a lot of money that people spend here. And secondly, like many brilliant people that then are going to build the great companies that the US have, right? When you look at unicorns, around 50% of unicorns were built at least partially for an immigrant founder, right? So I think the long-term implications are really dire if we keep on that trend. But anyway, I don't think we will. I don't think this is going to stay.
So do you think it might impact the hiring structures? Because we were doing our internal research, and there is one way. I mean, it might be possible that they only keep the top executives in the US on H1B, and they might outsource the other work to
Yeah,
other
I mean,
countries, maybe.
I think the people that are in favor of doing this, right? The narrative behind this is that immigrants are taking the jobs and now these jobs are going to go to Americans. I don't think you can force people to hire someone, right? Like if they want to hire someone that's the best person for the job and they're an immigrant and you no longer allow that, then that they can move them to Canada, to Mexico, to somewhere else and hire them there. Like you can outsource, and those people are not going to no longer be paying taxes in the US. So and generally speaking, like I don't think the government getting so deep into like how companies should run their businesses is a great idea. I come from a country where that happened a lot and it didn't end well. So just at least from my personal experience, I do love the more of the freedom side of things and meritocracy. Now, there are many indications of fraud with this system, and that should be eliminated. I think there's no question about it, right? Like, there's no place for fraud, and you are penalizing thousands of people doing things the right way because some people are doing fraud with this, right? So that should be eliminated, but that doesn't mean you need to eliminate the system because again, the system has so many advantages for the country that we want to keep, right? And if not, we are only going to realize it when we lose it.
Explain a bit more about the fraud.
Yeah, so there's many ways of doing frauds. You can create, like a consulting company that creates a job for an H1B. They don't really have a job; they just get the H1B and then they position it in a cheap way for other people. Or you have a job that really requires, let's say, a level 4 pay, but then you get an immigrant for a level 1 pay, and then you're underpaying that person, and that person is accepting just because they want to come to the US. With EB1A, there has been people that hired consultants to write papers for them. They get citations from other people that are also going through the fraud, and then they go to a competition organized also by the fraud organization. So then you have some people judging the competition of others, so you get judging and the other ones get the award. And then you get the article written, cited by other people that are also in the fraud. So there's all this schema of things trying to game the system and getting these categories. And recently, all of this came to light, and a lot of people got their green cards revoked after many years because they found that anyone that was writing articles on this outlet or was participating of these competitions or was judging these, all of them got their green cards revoked, and they are going to have a really really hard time getting any other visa in the future, right? Because of those activities. So these things happen, right? Like these things happen. I think as an immigrant community, we need to acknowledge it. We cannot just say, oh no, these people are just saying this because they don't like immigrants. Like I think these things happen. They shouldn't happen anymore. We should eliminate all fraud. So then, we can mostly focus on all the positive, effects of immigration in the country, and we can play by the rules, right? So that's what we do, right? And sometimes, you get consultations and you get people, asking you like, hey, can I do this? Or like you can only tell like, no, like don't do that, right? Like that's a really, really bad idea. This is a long-term thing, first, like it's wrong, but beyond being wrong, right? This is a marathon, right? You're going to get a work visa or a student visa and then a green card, and then many years later, citizenship, right? And you are going to live through many, many years wondering if at any point in time they're going to find out, about whatever you did, right? So I think it's better to take more time if you need, do things by the book, improve your profile, get the right thing, and then just, come with the right thing, right? And just finding what's the right avenue for you, right? There are many visas, so it's just a matter of being strategic and taking your time, being patient, and coming in the right way, right? And then it's a beautiful country that gives you a ton of opportunities where you can really develop your life, your work, your family, but then it has a price and it has some effort that you need to go through, right?
That makes total sense. And I think this is the reason it's called the country of immigrants.
It is. Yeah, it is. And, I think it's a very beyond everything we see on the news or people, on Twitter, X, whatever. It is very receptive to immigrants, right? And it's way more common to have an immigrant community here than anywhere in the world that I've been in my life, right? It's just so embedded into the culture. But again, right, we have our part to play here, and we need to play by the rule and contribute to this country and come with that, I think, attitude, at least I have, that I'm a guest in this country. I'm very grateful about all the opportunities I received, and just try to make our best to contribute and to improve and to grow the country, right? Again, I'm not saying the immigrant system is the best or it's not flawed, right? There are many things that are ridiculous about how they evaluate things, and they are the way the immigration system is set. They are extremely talented people that don't have a clear way into coming to the country, right? That's weird, right? That's very weird. You have an extremely talented engineer that maybe they didn't finish university, but they have been developing, like, tremendously great applications, but then they don't have a very public exposure because they're an engineer. They don't like to go on magazines, right? And there's sometimes like not a great pathway, like you cannot find any way, right? So there's that, and I think it would be great to see some reform in that sense to really really adapt. So the last really big immigration reform was in 86 with Reagan. So it's been a minute. um and internet came, AI, mobile, so many changes appeared in the world, and the regulations are not really reflecting that, right? So that's why sometimes we are trying to. So for example, high remuneration is one of the categories for EV1. So there's nothing in the regulation explaining how to show for remote work, right? Because you need to compare to your peers. So you're in India and you're working for a company in New York. Who are your peers? Do you compare yourself to Indian salaries, to US salaries? Like, none of those are really really like the best comparison. And sometimes USCIS is like, no, you're getting paid from a US company, so you need to compare yourself to the US. But that's not true because you live in India. So, like all these things that we find, and we need to find the best way to convey an argument. And sometimes it's not obvious, again, because the regulations are not really adapted to the world we live in right now.
Yeah,
Interesting.
interesting, very. So from there, I have one question that I really wanted to ask for a long time. Because one of the very common questions that we usually get from our clients is, should we go for EB1A, H1B, or O1? Considering that H1B is a gone case for now. And if someone is coming on F1 visa and they want to go for OPT and STEM OPT, what should be the ideal next step for them?
So I think the key word in immigration is optionality. I think that's what you always want to have. You don't want to marry yourself to any particular path because things might happen, right? Like the H1B 100K thing, or other things might happen, right? So O1 is always a great path because it's not necessarily tied to a prevailing wage, it's very flexible in terms of sponsorship opportunities. You don't need that many requirements from a company point of view, and you don't need to go through a lottery. So just understanding the O1 requirements and trying to develop them organically through the years, I think that's always a great thing because you're preparing yourself for a situation where there's no other option, and you go there. Of course, the O1 requirements are higher than the L1 or the H1B or the E2, like personally speaking, right? From the beneficiary point of view, you need to be way more recognized by the field, so that takes time. So my recommendation always is like, do yourself a favor, develop your O1 profile. If you go to our website, there's the learning part, there's the visa guides, there's the courses. You can learn about the O1 for free. Just developing your profile, making sure you are doing that, and then if in 2, 3, 5 years you're running out of options, you can always go for the O1, right? Now EB1 it's kind of the big brother, right, of the O1. It's extremely similar to the O1, but it's just harder. So any effort you make into creating a better O1 profile is also going to go towards creating a potential EB1A profile in which you don't even need a job or an employer or anything, right? So I would say that even before choosing, just improving your extraordinary ability profile organically in a real way, it's a great option that you cannot go wrong about. And then of course, like if you have OPT and you have STEM OPT and you get selected in the H1B, like use it. Like why not? Right. But just buying yourself optionality, I think it's the key way, because people sometimes realize that they need something else when it's a bit too late, and then the problem starts, right?
Absolutely. Speaking from the legal and the tax point, because we are lawyers and CPAs and we can't stay away from this topic for a very long time, have these clients ever, I mean, once they have gotten the advice that they need from the visa perspective, have they ever then went a little further from, okay, now that I have the visa, tell me how can I incorporate a firm for myself? Have you ever got such questions? And if yes, how do you deal with them? Because we would love to know about that.
Yeah, we send them to people like you guys. I mean, we don't manage that, and we don't want to manage that. Like we look, I am a big believer in the power of focus. And if you really want to build something extraordinary, you need to focus, right? And the more you focus, the higher the chances you have at building something extraordinary. And that's what we want to do with immigration, right? So if I start offering incorporation services and tax advice and all that, like that's an entirely new world that is very complicated, and I don't want to deal with that, right? I just want to become the best alternative in immigration, and we have partners, again, where we send them over and say like, yeah, talk with them. Like, yeah, we have some very basic minimal understanding of taxes and tax implications for immigrants, but we don't want to be dealing with that, so we have
Absolutely.
partners, where we send them over.
I
Right.
loved your response, Ramiro.
Yeah.
Seriously, it was straight to the point. I don't deal with this. I don't want to deal with this. But I
Yeah,
mean,
I mean,
yeah,
look,
complex. It's
it is
something.
difficult. Yeah, it is difficult. Like it's difficult to make anything worth, really differentiating in the world. So again, right? I think this is honestly our best chance of achieving that, but by just single-handedly focusing on immigration. And we're not even just focused on immigration; we're focused on business immigration. Like if I have someone trying to do a green card based on family, I don't take them. I just refer them to other attorneys. We don't do citizenship. We don't do certain business immigrations. Like we're not doing H2As that are for farmers or H2B more for hospitality. Like we don't do J's that are for researchers or like many other like or many other things. We are doing a very small subset of things just to make sure that we are providing the absolute best value for our clients.
Striking a
Yeah, I've
question
seen
from
this
this
on.
end is because we spoke about EB1, then we spoke about O1, and now that, and we have also spoken about the hotshot H1B, right? While everything looks really difficult because of its own restrictions, I think the very, very easiest visa which I can think of right now is L1. So can you just tell us a little bit about that, as in like how is it different for executives and how is it different for the business owners and other such parameters?
Yeah. So just to make an overview of like in the business world, where are the typical ones? So again, O1 is extraordinary ability, is focused on you as a person, right? What are your achievements? Great. H1Bs is based on on your studies, so your bachelor's, or comparable experience, the job offer that needs to be related to that experience, the prevailing wage, so how much your salary, and then of course having gone through the lottery, right? In most cases, L1 is about, there's two L1s, L1A and L1B, but both of them are intra-company transferees, right? So what that means is you need to have, let's say, a company in Argentina or a subsidiary in Argentina. Let's say the headquarters is in the US. So then the Argentinian subsidiary chooses to send you to the US company. So you need to have like two companies, one in the US, one abroad. They need to be related. You need to have worked at least for a year for that company abroad. That's another requirement. And every single day you spent in the US does not count, right? So let's say you started working 1 year ago. but you spend 1 month in the US, so you need one more month outside to be eligible. And then if you are the L1A, that's a manager position. So you want to have a manager executive a position where you have certain reports or doing something important for the business, both abroad and in the US. So you cannot just be an individual contributor. And then the L1B specialized knowledge that it's about you have a specific knowledge of the company that you cannot really hire, right? Let's say a developer that developed the algorithm that, where the company runs on. They have been working for you for many years. So you bring them to the US. But then here, the complication is about the size of the company, the two companies, the time working for your company abroad. And then finally, you have the treaty visas, the E1 and the E2. These are not available for every country. So, for example, Argentina has the E2, India does not. So you need to just check the list of there's 80 something countries that have a treaty. And so in this case, E2 is about the investment. So you making an investment in the US and having the potential to generate jobs. And then the E1 is about the trade, right? So let's say you have a service company and you're doing international trade mostly with the US and you have some track record of that, then you could potentially come to the US with the E1 after doing that trade, right? So those I would say are the common, usual suspects when you go in for a business visa. Then, there's all these things with OPT, CPT, but they're related to students. But there's not many more, right? And there's a few exceptions with certain countries like Canada and Mexico have the TN, is another treaty just for them. And then Singapore and Chile have the H1B1, that is kind of the H1B, but without the lottery. And Australia has the E3, that again is kind of the H1B without the lottery. But that's about it, right? If you don't fit into any of those, there's potentially not a great alternative for you to come on a work visa, right? That's what I was mentioning before, that sometimes you have great profiles, but sometimes there's not a great option for them, right? Because the other ones we're talking about, the H2A and H2B, are more for unskilled work, right? It's not for your typical bachelor's or master's graduate, right? So yeah, it's kind of a maze. So that's why there's all this strategic part of discussing with your attorney, okay, what's the best path, right? And a lot of these visas, they have many implications in terms of how much time can you stay in the US? How many renewals can you do? Can your spouse work? Is this dual intent? So can you pursue a green card at the same time? Or if you do it, you can get into problems to renewing it. Complexity starts to pile up. So that's why, our vision of a good service for people was always combining experienced attorneys with technology, because there's so many nuances and so many decisions where you want to trust a great advisor, that we do think that the future of this is not an AI agent, replacing people, but rather AI as a tool enhancing the work of great professionals, right?
Well, I would say thanks a lot for covering this because all these were my next questions and you covered it in one paragraph. You saved a lot of questions from being asked, but great insight. You have covered almost every visa that a student actually thinks of applying. One more thing that I have usually seen is people have a question. I'm on F and I'm on OPT and I want to own STEM OPT. Can I own a company? Can I own 100% shares of the company? And can I be the sole owner? So that is a very generalized question that we get a lot of times.
So the short answer to the question, can you work on your startup if you are an F1 OPT or F1 STEM OPT, is yes, you can. I know founders that they are working for their company with F1, both OPT and STEM OPT. Now, there's all this thing about the employer-employee relationship and the training and who's going to be monitoring, etc. So sometimes ownership is not exactly the same as control. So you might have a board which is controlling what you're doing, and they might be monitoring, and they would be the ones signing the paperwork and checking the trainings and coaching, etc. Right? So there are certain nuances. It's not necessarily a bad thing or an impossible thing to have 100% ownership both for O1 or F1 STEM OPT or STEM OPT, but there are additional considerations to make sure you are compliant and that the entity is not equivalent to you, right? In my opinion, what USCIS wants to see is that this is a bona fide thing. It's not just like a shell company you created for the excuse to getting a visa, right? There's a real company, real job, real oversight. So that's what they want to see, in my opinion, right? So there's many ways of proving that. Of course, if you have 10% ownership instead of 100, that's easier. If you have 100%, there might be questions. But again, right, having a board or having real company and employees, etc., they're also, again, it's a nuanced analysis, and it's subjective sometimes, like where the exact limits are. But yeah, the closer you're getting to, I incorporated this entity yesterday, I'm the sole owner, there's no revenue, no funding, no nothing, no board, and I want to get a visa. Well, that doesn't look like a company. That looks like an entity, right? You just created. So that's probably not going to fly. So it's just a matter, again, right? The same thing we were saying with the AB1, that it's not a checklist. This is the same, like, it depends. I mean, it's the most lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, but, it's the most lawyery thing I can say, right? It depends a bit,
Depends.
right? It's a combination of factors. It's not just like 100% doesn't work, 30% works, right? Um, so it's just whatever when you look it from the outside, right? This is the same when people tell me like, hey, can I come to the US back in 3 days, right? It's, like depends, right? Like depending on your travel history, my best advice that I give people is like, look, just put yourself in the shoes of an aggressive adjudicator or hostile adjudicator and try to see if you could think that your travel history could reflect that you're working illegally, or if it's clearly business and pleasure, right? If it's clearly business and pleasure, then you're fine. If when you look at your travel history, even if you're not doing anything wrong, if someone could actually think that you're doing something wrong, then you're getting yourself in risk, in a risk path. And here's the same, right? Like when you look it from the outside, okay, I incorporated my company yesterday, no revenue, no funding, no nothing, no employees, no clients, and I want to sponsor myself, but I say this is a real company and there's no board. Like, well, maybe that's not going to be the best idea.
Sometimes I feel that they make rules so that people can't break rules, but then it's like a vicious cycle, There was rule made, then there's breaking, and then it's again a rule.
And that's, come back to our previous discussion. Like, it's not a great idea to try to game the system because you start to run into walls, right?
Absolutely.
Beyond the ethical
Absolutely.
considerations, like let's forget for a minute about morals or ethics. Like, and I always tell my clients, like, look, ideally try to get the visa that sounds more like your life, right? Even if another one gives you better benefits, the closer the visa reflects your reality, the easier life you're going to have, because then it starts to complicate, right? Like it starts in the next path, in the green card, the visa, at the airport. Like ideally that reflects the reality. I mean, and sometimes it's not easy, again, because the immigration system is not perfect, and the visas are not really reflecting everything as they should. But still, right, like the more creative you get, the more chances that something is not going to go exactly right.
The ultimate aim of a visa is to make sure things don't go south. That
Exactly.
makes total sense. So, since we started this conversation with AI, let's come full circle. So, how do you see AI fitting into tricky immigration cases, especially with RFEs or noise that you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, look, AI. So AI is not deterministic, right? So sometimes you send the same prompt, the same information, it responds A, and sometimes it responds B, right? So it's not, at least for now, there's a lot of variants. So I think it's a great tool if you have the human in the loop, right? So for example, we do that combination all the time. So in Tukki's process, right, you have like a part that AI generates, and then the paralegal reviews, and then the paralegals refines, and then you send it to the attorney, and then the attorney checks that everything is okay, and then the client. So you have AI baked into every single process, but then you always have humans in the loop to improve it, right? And the humans are also refining the instructions or the prompts or the organization. So I think getting to that ideal combination between humans and AI is probably the short term gain that makes the most sense and the best ROI. Now, if we're going to have an AI agent in 5 years that can actually replace an attorney, I don't know, maybe. I do think that replacing 95% of a human and replacing 100% are two things that are extremely different. And the 100% is many orders of magnitude more complicated than 95. because there's, again, so many nuances, so many details, so many edge cases that is so hard to get. And there's the thing of the trustworthiness, right? Like, do you really want to risk your visa due to like an AI agent assuming that that was the regulation cited, or do you want like an actual person checking it, right? So it's, again, at least the approach we are taking is using as our resources as much as we can to accelerate, to improve, to check quality. But every single paperwork that comes through us, it always goes at least through 3 layers of human review, just to make sure like everything is okay. Like, we never trust the AI. Again, it's an extremely awesome resource. Like, it's speeding up our work tremendously. It's improving the quality of our work tremendously. But at least from what I've seen today, I would never trust an AI with anything without someone reviewing it.
When I first saw your website, that was the first thing that attracted me, to be honest. Because when I saw that, I quickly sent it to my group and I was like, guys, see this. This is the kind of startup that we would like to have a conversation with. And then I contacted you. So I'm
Yeah. No, awesome. Yeah, thank you. I agree. I mean, and I know there's a lot of hype with AI agents now for everything, right? Like every day I see a new startup doing an AI agent for something. And I understand how attractive that is. But again, in industries where you're playing with the lives of people and this impacts real life, you know, it's not somewhere where I feel comfortable just risking it in that way, right? I understand, I've seen already awesome companies doing like collections, right? Okay, if the AI agent messes up the call, you might not get the collection of the $20 they owe you for the cell phone. That's fine. Like, it's not terrible. Like, no one cares, right? But this is not the case, right? You're playing with the lives of a family. This
correct.
depends on their business, on their kids going to school with their friends. Like, it's not somewhere where you want to really trust like an AI agent doing something but their own. And then, someone lives get, impacted in a really bad way. So again, I guess it depends a bit on the industry and what you're doing and what are the consequences of something going wrong. In our case, those stakes are too high. So I don't envision something in the short or medium term where we would even consider that. Again, if in 10 years you get to a point where an AI, we got it to a point where it's really overperforming, the work of attorneys, then we can have a different conversation, right? But again, I am a bit less optimistic than a lot of founders I talk to in terms of like the real capabilities of AI being able to replace humans, at least in the short term, right? Like, then we'll see.
I think you are one of the very first founders or the owners that I've come across who has an AI startup, but is brutally honest about how much one to trust on the AI,
Yeah, no, and
which speaks a lot about EU. I mean,
no, and I think, and we use way more AI than a lot of. I mean, I've seen some startups that they said talk about AI and they don't really use that much AI. But look, I think it's just being honest, right? And for us, transparency and honesty is our,
absolutely.
is the most
It's okay.
important thing, right? Like, we want to be trustworthy, and we want people to know what we're doing and how we're using things, right? And there's so much value you can also add even without AI, just with a good process, a good system, a good technology that is on top of that. And then AI is an amplifier, right? Because the AI is only going to be able to work with whatever you give it. And if you give the AI bad information, it's not going to perform well, right? So again, I think it's an incredible tool. It's allowing us to be extremely efficient and elevates the quality of our work. But again, that's what it is
Important.
right now. And I think that's what's going to be for, bit of time. Then, we'll see, if the world surprises us and we get there soon. But for now, we'll keep with our plan.
Okay. One last question. You have built a tech company in like one of the most regulated legal fields. So what's been harder for you, US corporate paperwork or the US immigration paperwork?
That's a great question. I don't know, like, both are really hard, but I think, no, I think working in such a regulated environment and so bureaucratic and all these things, like, that's hard, right? Because you can create a great software, a great petition, and then you still rely on an antiquated system for the government with an officer that they don't have more than 90 minutes to review 1000 pages of paper. So sometimes I think it's frustrating when you did everything well and you have an incredible case, and then you get RFE from the government, a request for evidence. It's like, wait, why is this happening, right? Like, I know for a fact this should not be happening. So I think, I mean, the two are hard, but I think that's probably the harder.
I was just imagining when he was saying all of these things that what if one fine day we have reached a level where all of the consulates gets replaced by the AI, and then probably AI will have an answer as to which formula works.
Actually, I think there has been some indications and there are some chatter that they are already using AI to adjudicate certain things, and you can see RFEs written in a different way. So I do think they're already experimenting with some of that, and not in the best way possible, unfortunately. But I think that's also going to come into play. So it's going to be interesting because you're generating petitions with the help of the AI. They are adjudicating petitions with the help of AI and how they are training, and then it's all going to become like, okay, what are the things that the AIs are checking? Or so it's all very interesting in that way, like how that's going to affect the future of immigration or other industries.
Thank you so much, Ramiro. I think it was one heck of an amazing, informative, and like the information download was incredible. I think we have covered almost all the questions that we have and which we made from what the clients ask us. So I think that was amazing. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for being on the very first episode of our very first podcast. And hope you loved being our guest, and hope we had some amazing questions for you.
I did and had a lot of fun. So thank you so much for inviting me again.
Thank you so much.
I just wanted to add one thing. That Ramiro has just launched a course on his website, a free
Yes.
course on EB1A. So anyone watching this podcast, if you want to apply for EB1A, you can find it on his website. Absolutely free.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Ramiro. Bye bye. Great talking to you.